By now, most of us have heard about the Metaverse, although there isn't necessarily a consensus on exactly what it is. We've had versions of it for the last 15 years or so, but there's been a renewed interest of late, and big companies are making big investments in it. So what exactly has changed? What's new? And what does the Metaverse future look like? Welcome to W3B Talks, an ongoing exploration of the impact of Web3 and blockchain technologies on business, government, and society. My name's Doug Heintzman. I am the Chief Catalyst at the Blockchain Research Institute. In this episode, we're going to look at Web3 and blockchain and how they're helping build the Metaverse. To help us better understand this very complex topic, I am delighted to welcome Jim Slotta to the podcast. Jim is a professor of education at the University of Toronto. Welcome to the podcast, Jim.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
You know, I read Snow Crash back in the 1990s and was first introduced to the science fiction version of the Metaverse. It was a parallel world, a digital world where people would socialize, they would seek and accumulate information, they would transact. I also read Ready Player One, and kind of got quite fascinated by the concept of the Oasis and of its multi-dimensions, right? That you could go to school there, that you could work there, that you could, go to parties there, that you could play games there. And, it was a vision of a digital world that bridged all kinds of aspects of our lives together. And then also back in the late 2000s, I was at IBM and I was doing strategy work, and we were fascinated by Second Life, and I ended up spending quite a bit of time, teleporting and flying around and walking around islands and such in Second Life. So I've had bits and pieces of what the Metaverse might be, and I'm fascinated by what's happened lately as the Metaverse has kind of entered the consciousness in the last year and a half or so. And suddenly a big thing, and you can't open your email without someone trying to sell you more real estate or something like that in a metaverse. So, Jim, in your mind, where are we? I mean, what is this new metaverse that we've been talking about?
You're asking me. I'm a citizen, right? So I'm a citizen with a job in a place, and I work with people, and so I'm really aware of the intrusion of the kind of virtual hybrid forms that have come up lately. I also teach, media and learning here at the University of Toronto. So I am and have been aware of the kind of impact of the internet on all things, and that's pretty much the basis of a lot of my teaching here. So that means I know nothing. It means I'm really aware of how little we know. And I think that could be a danger overall, is that there are plenty of people out there who think they know, exactly where it's going. But for me, I see the internet as a kind of a moment in Western civilization, and now, actually in global civilization, that is quickly maturing from Web 1 through Web 2 into whatever you would call Web 3. But basically, it's a powerful affordance for human work and human functions and human practices that has sort of transformed society. And you can look at Web 2 if you want as a transactional web. People talk about the writing web, but it's really when I started doing my banking and buying my books and meeting my friends and having things that used to have me go out and be in the world, that being able to do that from my living room or my desk here at work, where I still like to come, by the way. That's when the internet, the Dow tripled, in 2000, and humans got all these kind of free cycles, right? From an organizational psychology perspective, that's what the Industrial Revolution did for us with the steam engine and the cotton gin, and you could suddenly have 10,000 saw movements in a minute, and I think with the internet we got likewise a whole bunch of free cycles, and everybody made a gob of money off of it, and indeed it changed all of what we do and how we do it. which is the nature of my thinking and teaching has to do with what happens to the world, or what happens to any sort of microcosm of the world when you fundamentally change its practices. If you look at the world through the lens of practices, you end up you can see it through what we call communities of practice, which is a theoretical idea from the learning sciences. And it essentially describes how humans have co-organized around critical practices like grocery store, bus station, university, and all of the different kinds of things and roles and transactions that people do are not written down anywhere. And yet we still manage to somehow do these things for decades just by kind of apprenticing people that come in and engaging them around these practices. And that's how we do student registration and student enrollment and teaching and janitorial and, groundskeeping, and all of it is just sort of rehearsed through historical engagement in these practices. So just to finish it, when you take something like the internet and it changes those practices, and now I can register online, or I can take a course online, or I can teach online, or I can do groceries online, or I can, any of these kind of communities of practice in the world are being kind of affected by the new affordances of the internet. And as we move into Web3, we'll have that conversation today, but this is really having an impact on a kind of ubiquitous impact on all these communities of practice, including the university, which is my place. But when you ask me, the question is sort of, how do I see Web3? I kind of see it as a kind of progression of Web 1 and Web 2 into this kind of expediency network for facilitating the kind of replacement of old practices with new digital forms. And that's how I'm looking at it.
Well, this concept, this idea, or then the term community of interest, I find kind of very interesting.
Community of practice.
Sorry, community of practice. Yeah. You're right. In the real world, there are various different communities, and they have different practices and different domains, and each of them have different vocabularies and different rule sets, and yet there is connective tissue, right? We have transportation infrastructure and communication infrastructure that allows those various different communities to interact with each other. In some ways, is that a reasonable analog about what the metaverse possibly could be? Because, we've had worlds in the digital space, right? There's World of Warcraft, and you go in and you do World of Warcraft things. And we've had various different kinds of, community organizations in the digital space that are focused. And many of them have their own physics rules and their own currencies and their own practices. In many ways, open source coding is another one of these kind of community environments, and they've got a certain tool set that they use. But these are worlds and universes. Is the metaverse perhaps what happens when you take those worlds and you provide connective tissue so that they can actually interact with each other?
I'm not sure. I mean, I guess a couple things to that. Like I could imagine communities of practice occurring within a virtual world, right? If we in the old days with Second Life, but in the new world of Meta, I think you could imagine a company being set up in a virtualized space, and actually have a place-based metaphor for that space where I actually have to walk down the hallway like in GatherTown, and it takes delta amount of time, and I get to another virtual place and I have to do something, and someone else needs to be there, quote unquote. And we could manufacture a kind of virtualized real world. But in essence, no matter what, even let's say in an open source coding community, which are often distributed and mostly online, they have lots of practices that they do that involve commits to GitHub and testing out and getting on the Slack channel and putting our headsets on, and they have those existing practices that are exercised and rehearsed, and they move them from one GitHub group to the next, so they get normed. I just think that the internet and the Web3, the metaverse, if you want, is going to come into the existing human world and lay on top of it, whether that's connective, it is going to bring in new affordances. This is kind of a Marshall McLuhan concept. When you change the media, you change the message. When you change the practices and you add new affordances that don't that kind of have implications on all the other ones, all the co-occurring ones within a community of practice, it just changes the whole community. And suddenly nobody comes to work anymore, and you have businesses closing their physical shop. You don't know what else you lose there, and that's a kind of. I hope we'll come back to that.
Let's come back to that, because
we don't know what we're losing, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really interesting topic. But before we get to that really interesting topic, I still want to kind of build part of the foundation here. And, I've been doing a lot of thinking about, what exactly is the metaverse? Obviously Facebook actually renamed themselves, and they spent, $9.2 billion in the last 12 months on research and development. And they announced legs, right? We now have legs,
I saw that.
which is very exciting. But obviously, a whole bunch of people think there's something important here. So I've been trying to figure out what that difference is, right? What's new here. And as I said, I spent quite a bit of time in Second Life as a researcher, back when it was, the de rigueur. And I remember, I think it was in 2009 and so, IBM and Linden Labs, who ran Second Life, did this very highly publicized experiment. And they teleported an avatar between OpenSim, which was a universe that was, kind of an open spec universe, and Second Life, which was a closed universe run by a private company. And to great fanfare, the avatar was successfully teleported from one universe to another universe. But it showed up naked. Mm-hmm. And the reason it showed up naked was that clothing were assets, right? That they had an economic worth. You could purchase clothing and trade them and earn, and you could convert fiat to Linden dollars. And there was no mechanism to allow the transfer of assets through some sort of exchange that would explain how much an asset was worth if exchanged from one universe to another universe. And that backplane of being able to, have assets and to have ownership didn't exist. And so, part of my thinking's been that perhaps the big deal here is that this version of the metaverse, along with more sophisticated physics engines and faster graphics processors and, better headsets and the like, but along with all of that we now have access to a backplane, right? That blockchain provides a mechanism to allow for ownership to happen. And if you have ownership, then you can start building businesses and economies and marketplaces. And then that's completely transformative. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I like that. I think you're again, your guess and my guess, right? But I don't think, I wouldn't bet on this becoming about virtual reality and virtualized worlds like Second Life and Meta. I think there will be a lot of that, but I think the bigger story of Web3 is about kind of continuing the progress toward transactional spaces, toward recommender systems, toward kind of affordances for work, for social, for commerce. And if we want to turn into a second body and migrate around in a virtual world, I think that's obviously maps onto that just fine. But those kind of blockchain-y, token-based credentialing systems are definitely going to be, I think, part of it. I think you guys are betting correctly there. We're all going to be able to do our world from our desk. Necessarily mean I have to be in a virtual body, but it does mean that the rich will get richer. The social problems will become more profound. The environmental problems aren't going anywhere. I guess we can reduce less, we can produce less carbon if we don't move around. But I think Web3 is really going to be driven by the needs of people to kind of make money. And that's how it's been driven in Web2.
Well, so Jim, let's go there because I think you're on a really interesting point, right? And you can argue that any technology will have positive and negative impacts, especially in its genesis and early formation. But a lot of people are arguing that Metaverse is a leveling technology, right? That it allows for much greater inclusivity, that it abstracts the haves and the have-nots, and where you live and its proximity to a big urban center, or what kind of car you drive, or what kind of clothes you wear. The barrier to entry and participation is extremely low. And so it could be much, much more inclusive and allow for gig economy workers to be productive from wherever and whenever they are. So, that's part of the narrative that many people are, espousing. But you have a view that suggests that may not pan out that way, that it might exacerbate inequities in society. Can you help us, pull at that thread?
Yeah, I appreciate the point, Douglas. I think that's an important point. I've made that point myself with the internet, that it's a great equity builder. The rich schools used to have the good libraries and the poor schools didn't. And then the poor schools would get the rich schools' old library when they got a new one. And when the internet came along, they all got the same internet, which was awesome. So I don't disagree with some of that reasoning about inclusivity. I think it's great that young people can move out of Toronto and go buy a place now in remote Ontario and do their day job. And also that people who are less, who don't have the wherewithal to commute or to get in can get places. Like, I think there is an affordance for inclusivity, no doubt. But again, that's often an argument made by the neoliberal agenda that, everybody can have it and it's great. And it'll let moms stay at home, and it'll let people get online and submit their resumes on Indeed and get a job. And if that's a little bit true, there's still rich getting richer. Okay. And there's still the advantages are going to prevail and even get more, right? So if you're a big player in that world, the world that you're building, that world is being built by the digital elite, if you will. And they're gonna make sure that the people that have the kind of capital get more capital, and the people that don't, and that includes kind of social capital, are gonna have an increasingly challenging life to kind of get into any of that. There's always going to be the people in our world that are doing the dirty work and not having the benefits of these kind of work from home jobs and the expediencies of the metaverse. So I do suspect you're going to see a new kind of digital divide. I don't think that this is going to build care for the people who need it. And I think you're going to see social problems that are already kind of poking up are gonna occur. Now, maybe this new internet can offer ways for us to redress some of that. I think that's not a hopeless situation. I think we can, let's say, index the need for care and find those people and respond to them, right? We can look at a microcosm of just the latest e-schooling effort that happened during the pandemic. And there were kids that thrived when we went online to learn, and there were kids that fell further behind. And the kids that fell further behind were by and large the ones that you could probably predict. Didn't have support, didn't have access, didn't have the kind of language of how and why they should take that seriously. So as we move into more and more of that, you're going to find that it privileges the people that are able to participate in those modes, and it kind of compromises further the ones who can't. And I don't, again, I think that's a social challenge that we can respond to, but it is not on the front burner of the folks that are driving this change. So we're going to have to keep that in the discussion. And unfortunately, there is a lot of discussion about these issues these days. So that's hopeful.
Yeah. So in what you just said, it seems to me there's three very interesting ideas that that you alluded to. One of which is the concern that I think is quite valid that says that this technology, like many other technologies, could enable some situations that society doesn't think are very constructive, and don't contribute to welfare. That we'll spend all of our time in casinos or with pornography, or in these increasingly realistic virtual chat groups with people that are like-minded about.
I didn't say any of that, but I don't disagree with those. Those will continue to be. Those will be interesting challenges too.
Right. Yeah. I was extrapolating
I follow you.
You're giving me.
I follow you.
I think that is a very reasonable concern. That anytime that you build an enabling technology, that you break down barriers and access to certain kinds of behaviors and collective behaviors that may not contribute to societal welfare. And I think those are very legitimate things that we need to worry about. The second point that I think you were making was the digital divide, which says that there are certain people that, by virtue of their access to the technology or their literacy with the technology, are going to be able to, take advantage of, whether it's educational offerings or, more efficient transactions or, being able to meet the right people, that there's going to be digital haves and digital have-nots, and any, technology is going to exacerbate that divide, and we need to worry about that from a society standpoint. And the third piece, which was in your order, actually the first piece, is a different kind of digital divide, or actually it's the whether the value created by this will be distributed in anything approaching an equitable fashion, whether the rich companies that are building this will just get richer. And on that point, I think that there's an assumption implicit in what you were arguing, that this is going to be a platform play, right? That the biggest companies in the world are, Apple and Google and Amazon and Facebook. These are all, platform-oriented companies, and that by virtue of them providing a platform and everyone signing on to the platform, and for them, running the state, the record of all transactions and collecting all the data about people's behaviors and stuff, that will just give them more and more tools to accumulate more and more wealth and more power and control. And there's an argument that says that, the platform view of things is an artifact of the Web 2 world, that in the Web 3 world, its radical composability and its potential to have decentralized governance means that many smaller economic actors will be able to combine their resources and produce composite goods and services to the marketplace in ways that were never possible before, and that it'll be much more difficult for big platform companies to dominate and to accumulate the vast amount of value being created. So that's the argument. Do you buy that?
That's hopeful. I mean, I bought that when we were so big fans of open source development, and, have basically watched that movement, not flourish. It hasn't vanished, but, I think Linux still drives 2/3 of the machines in the world, and we still have hope for that kind of decentralized commerce. But and actually Meta, the kind of latest moves on the part of Meta suggest that they're not going to try to dominate anymore. They're going to try to be more like an operating system that supports all that stuff. So maybe I just don't know. I would assume that you're going to get in Web 3 the next generation of Web 2, the way that Web 2 brought us from Web 1. So this movement of the web shouldn't be seen as massive tectonic, shift as much as progression. And the players, Apple, Facebook, Google, I mean, they're they're guessing with the rest of us, but they got the resources. They're going to have content, they're going to have people. They're going to do their best to kind of capitalize and keep business. So maybe we'll just see. Again, I think for me, the bigger issues are the kind of the climate change that's happening in our communities of practice around the world. And the pandemic was a tectonic moment that sort of nudged everybody quickly into what it was probably heading for. But we got a quick break that showed us where that was, and what it is startling to many of us, that we no longer have, the people no longer want to go to work. And we just gave all of our staff here in my department, can only have to come in 2 days a week. So the same thing's happening in higher education. And I think those kind of factors are much bigger to me than what's happening on the web. And
I agree. And I think the pandemic could very well be an accelerant for all of this. And who knows, maybe it's possible that this kind of two-dimensional interface that, we've used for the last 2 years during the pandemic becomes more immersive and more spatially oriented. And
yeah, we'll be on virtual worlds, and we'll be on.
But maybe that's a hybrid, right? That, we get some of the attributes of the in-person experience and some of the convenience of the remote experience, and we can hybridize it.
Yeah, well, shoot me now, honestly. Like, I read George Orwell, you read No World or whatever, but I don't think you gradually approximate human condition by making it increasingly veridical.
Yeah.
I agree that seeing my doctor online instead of going in is transformational. I agree that having that be available to people in remote places or in underdeveloped settings is miraculous and transformational. So you cannot get around the affordances and the arguments of this slide. It is going to happen because it is offering expediency, efficiency, availability. So it is going to happen. But I mean, if we continue to make these kind of developments of to try to make this closer and closer to me and you really sitting in a room together, we're looking at each other now, via Zoom screen. And I think it's something like 500,000 Zoom minutes the last 3 years, or some crazy stat. I'm one of the top Zoomers in my department, that's for sure. I don't know. It makes me feel sad and distressed that that's what we want to argue for, that it's like better for me to sit in my room and connect with you guys all, so none of us have to come in. And then if you take that to education, which they are, right? Especially in higher education, can we not all just e-learn? And then I don't have to send my kid to college for 4 years. That costs, lots of money. And also we can, there's all kinds of arguments for why that would be a good thing. We might be able to spend a few minutes talking about that. You're going to lose the university. You're going to lose the experience of being in a place with people, the horribly, horribly inefficient experience that was the university, which gave rise to all of those unnecessary but super important side experiences of going to cafes and hanging out and before class and being in a dorm and having the experience. So yeah, we'll keep sliding down this path. I don't know where it's going, but it's going everywhere in the world of work and pretty much everywhere in the world of higher education.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I remember in my first year of university, undergraduate, one of my professors, one of my very first classes said, welcome to Queen's University, and you're going to learn a lot in the next 4 years, but actually a relatively small amount of that's going to happen in a classroom. And he was right. I mean, there's a lot to be said for that in-person, on-campus sort of experience as part of, learning life's lessons. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges that I also think that you're right that for many people it'll be transformative, because there are some people that just, for many reasons, will never be able to experience that, on-campus university experience. But as well as the fact that we're going to be lifelong learners, right? That we need to always go back to school, and it's just not realistic to spend all your time at university. You've got work to do. Your learning is going to be 5 to 7 hours a week instead of every day. So can we create environments for learning that are just much more effective by using some of this technology? And does that fit into the whole, the big educational picture? I think those are very valid questions. Now, one area that's kind of been, I suppose, I'm not sure I guess it is concerning me in terms of wanting to figure out, what it really means. But the intersection of artificial intelligence with these new spatial environments. I mean, already with augmented and artificial realities, we have various different prediction engines that are, helping us navigate through those worlds, in the extreme. In many ways, the experience of driving some of the more advanced vehicles out there are increasingly virtual environments where AI is, interdicting our experience with the real world. When you merge it with the metaverse, how do you see those two things coming together? And is that a good thing or a scary thing?
Yeah, I have been thinking a bit about that. Let me quickly return to the previous just for a second on the shifting of the, I like the way that you framed, the need for continuing education and upskilling and lifelong learning. And I do think that's unrealistic to do at a university, right? I'm selfishly cognizant of my environment, of the place that I work and the institution that I represent here, and also what the role of that institution is in society, which is more than educating undergraduate students, although that pays a lot of the kind of bills for things. But if you're going to hit those things, and this includes there are parallels in other disciplines, certainly in the world of work, where you've got companies that are now hybridizing and virtualizing. If you hit all of us with rapid change, this is back to that COP, community of practice construct. You get something like climate change, and what climate change is known for is rapid changing of ecosystems in the environmental context of climate change. It's like clear cutting a forest. When you clear cut a forest, you lose the biodiversity, you lose the 1,200 species or whatever, and you get what grows back, right? And that happens with climate change when the kelp forests move from California up into British Columbia. You get something in its place, and you'll get something up in British Columbia that looks like kelp, but you won't get the biodiversity of the kelp forest. Same thing with the university and with the business world. You're going to have quick change, and you're going to lose that biodiversity, and you're going to get back, kind of neoliberal expediency and handling the job at hand, which would be to give you an undergraduate degree, for example, that's just for you, that's tailored, that's accessible, that's cheap. But you'll lose the kind of wonderful inefficiencies that we had this sort of 1,000-year experiment that has been changing along, but changes slowly, like the real climate used to also change. But the what's going on these days with the rise of the internet is definitely pushing on all these institutions, changing them quickly, and we're going to have to just see where it goes. But with AI, let me just say, I think that's gonna be Web 4. You go into a virtual world and you're surrounded by virtual beings, and half of them are real and half of them are bots, and half of those bots are real.
Gosh, I hadn't even thought of that. I was just thinking about, the prediction engine capabilities that as you interacted with the world was adapting around you because it was anticipating the things you were looking at. I hadn't even thought about the idea of artificial people.
Oh, then if you're looking at the latest, text, natural language processing engines, there's an explosion of capability of interpreting real-time language and producing real-time language. It won't take long before you can have an engine that generates a brand new essay for any university level college that's will score a B plus if you want a B plus or an A. Like this stuff is really coming along quick. So it's hard to predict exactly where that's going to show up in the Web3, but the advances of AI are going to make machine learning, which is our the more recent kind of AI wave, powerful wave. I think it's going to make machine learning even look small in comparison. So when you add the capabilities of generating content and of receiving and interpreting natural language into the metaverse, you're going to get, blockchain notwithstanding, you're going to get a whole bunch of new possibilities for the kinds of change that we've been talking about, but also some of the degeneracies that you mentioned as well. But overall, this is just Pandora's box. So people like me who are kind of aware enough about all this that we've been professing about it for 20 years and watching it, in my class, I've been teaching the same class on media and learning since 2004, but before that, another related class. You just sort of watch all this, and then iPhones came up, right? And then here comes the Web3. So we'll see where it goes. But
yeah.
I mean, one thing that it's doing is it's changing the communities of practice of our world, and it is potentially equity building, but it is very also potentially driving deeper divides, such that the elite will continue to send their kids to four-year college because they'll see it as nostalgic and truly good learning. Like they'll see it as like, that's what real college is getting our kids a proper education. And the other tiers will get, e-learning in various forms. And I can tell you as an educator that e-learning is not that great. And
but already in society, the elites send their kids to universities, and no one else does. So
I agree, it's true.
And we can give those other tiers a better quality education that they have today.
That's right. We'll give a wider catchment of people an undergraduate degree, while making that undergraduate degree less valuable. So congratulations. Here's the keys to the kingdom. You now have an undergraduate degree when you never could get one before, thanks to the almighty internet that gave you that while eroding the university, and basically changing the future of work. And I think the work kind of, if you talk to 12-year-olds and 14-year-olds right now, there's a lot of anxiety about what their world is going to have for them. And I have those kids of my own right now, and they are not at all clear that there are going to be jobs, that there's going to be money, that there's going to be stability, that the world as they know it is going to kind of keep its norms and expectations. So we're really kind of taking a match to Tinder here without knowing a lot about what we're doing.
I think that's fair. I mean, what I'm hearing from you is that I detect a certain kind of internal conflict, because I think on the one hand, you actually do see that there's a great number of use cases where this technology will actually be very good and more inclusive and, more productive and will allow, various different parts of our society that haven't been able to participate in a lot of value creation, much better access to that. And on the other hand, there's all kinds of things that could go horribly wrong, and that there's a significant concern about, degrading the human experience. And I think that's very valid. I think that's probably a concern that we've always had at the transition between eras, right? When new foundational technologies were introduced. When electricity was introduced and we were largely an agrarian society, there was a lot of people that were concerned about what electrification was going to do to urbanization, what urbanization was going to do to, their way of life, the way that, they had always lived. And we built a different kind of society because of that technology. And it had, ills and it had benefits. So I think it's going to be interesting, and I think we should be careful about it. So it's an interesting time to be alive, and I'm for one, I'm glad, Jim, that you're out there thinking about this stuff, and talking and teaching students and helping them get the critical thinking skills so that they can participate in the building of whatever this new world is going to offer us.
Yeah, well, it is Pandora's box. I think that's important to know. We've been dabbling in that box since, I'd say, really since early 2000s, knowing that it was going to open up all sorts of doors, and we have seen them open. I can walk around right now and have, shopping and maps and messaging and all that crazy stuff on my phone in real time. I'm in touch with my kids. So we all love that stuff. It's magic. The wizards are you guys and some of these tech developers and the Meta companies and Google, and they say do no harm, but I just think the wizards don't really kind of have their handle on what this is doing to society, and they don't really always have social welfare in mind. They're kind of riding a wave. So there's probably no way to stop it, but indeed, we're going to have to think about our kids, and we're going to have to think about I think, higher education is going to have to do some deep thinking. If it doesn't really care for what the university experience is and decide that that's important, that's all going to be online before you know it. A lot of it with VR headsets, I'm sure, but these things are just kind of happening, and we're going along like it's an avalanche. But we need to be aware. We need to be thoughtful. We need to kind of be reflective and keep our eye out for where things might be sliding in dangerous directions. And I'm not going to be able to do that. We're going to need everybody to kind of pay attention to that. And fortunately, there are a lot of folks thinking about equity and justice and inclusiveness and decolonizing our world. And so hopefully those people will show up in the tech sector and show up in the Meta world. I think you guys are thinking about some interesting topics in decentralized, in kind of credentialing. Education is going to need credentialing, but how can we turn that toward care, right? How can we turn that toward somebody who has a low clout score, who doesn't get the Indeed notification that there's a job for them? How can we find those people and bring them up and have them not fall further behind? I think these are the kind of questions we're going to need, kind of thoughtful engagement of that community sooner than later, and hopefully we'll survive the kind of the rush that is the changes that we're in right now. The next 5 years or so are going to be very, very interesting.
Well, Jim, you've certainly given us an awful lot to think about, and thank you, Jim, for helping us better understand what the metaverse is and how Web3 and blockchain will play a role in the emerging metaverse, and how they're going to usher in a new era. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of W3B Talks. You can find research on this and other topics at blockchainresearchinstitute.org. I'm your host, Doug Heintzman. We hope that you'll join us for our next episode of W3B Talks.